But I'm going to go ahead and read this section that I left off on. Contracts in myths. There are a number of historic precedents for the belief in sacred contracts. The world's scriptures recount God speaking directly to many people, from Adam, Noah, and Jesus in the West, to a wide range of seers and mystics in the East. Yet the divine also sends extraordinary spiritual messages to get our attention and ensure that we abide by his plans. Messengers who provide guidance and support from the heavens include figures such as the angel Gabriel, who plays a role in both the Gospels and the Quran, as well as a wide range of anonymous guardian angels, spirits, sylphs, jinn, asuras, fairies, and little people. Spiritual messengers form the basis of the world's religious literature. From the angel of the Lord who spoke to Abraham, Jacob. Stop it! What are you barking at? Stop. Fat boy, stop. Fat boy, stop. Fat boy! What are you barking at? Sorry. Angel of the Lord who spoke to Abraham, Jacob, and Muhammad, to the angel Moroni of the Mormons. Stop. They relay blessings, warnings, wisdom, and requests to those on earth, either directly through voices and apparitions or indirectly through dreams and insights that flash through our consciousness, out of the blue. Many people have shared stories with me about divine encounters with angels in which they received profound guidance, comfort, or instructions about how to proceed with their lives. And many people describe angelic interventions in which they are given a warning about something or someone in their lives. I had such an experience years ago while on my way home from work one evening. As I was driving down a main highway in Chicago, I heard a very clear voice tell me, "Slow down. A red truck is going to run the stop sign at the next street." I immediately stepped on the brake, and as I did, a red truck raced through a stop sign not 10 feet in front of me. Only then did I realize that something beyond my own intuition had warned me. Messengers also bring news that is less dramatic but no less life-altering. The 1991 movie Grand Canyon is a wonderfully rich depiction of everyday angels and life-altering interventions. Written and directed by Lawrence Kasdan, the film weaves together several plots in which apparently innocent synchronicities bring people together in ways that change their lives. One of the main characters, Claire, played by Mary McDonald, finds an abandoned baby under a bush when she goes on her daily run and slightly alters her usual route. She's convinced that she was meant to find and care for this baby and says so to her skeptical husband, Mac, played by Kevin Kline. Some kind of connection has been made, she says, and it has to be played out. When Mac tries unsuccessfully to change her mind and then tries to end the discussion by saying that his head hurts, Claire refuses to allow it, saying memorably, "It's just an inappropriate response to get a headache in the presence of a miracle." I love that. Mac later recalls a miracle of his own. One morning when he was about to cross the busy Los Angeles street, a hand reached out and suddenly pulled him back to the curb. Just then a bus rumbled by in front of him, and he realized that his life had been spared. An event, he says, that literally changed everything for me. Looking around, he sees that woman who grabbed him back from the curb is smiling and wearing a Pittsburgh Pirates cap. The Pirates happened to be Mac's favorite team. He even named his son after Pirates great Roberto Clemente. And he realized that this cannot be simple coincidence. That's not your usual thing at 9 a.m. on Wilshire Boulevard, a woman in Pittsburgh Pirates baseball cap, he says. It's a little suspicious. The events in the film remind me of a true life story of Maureen, a newly married woman in her early 30s who developed a tumor in her ovaries and had to have a hysterectomy. Realizing that she could never bear children plunged her into a depression so intense that both her parents and her husband feared that she might attempt suicide. Besides her own grief over the loss of her ability to conceive, Maureen feared that her marriage would eventually disintegrate because she knew how much her husband wanted children. I believe from the time I was a child that I was meant to be a mother, she told me when we met some years later. I could not have imagined a future other than as a wife and a mother. After the operation, it was as if my life had ended. In fact, a part of my life did end. I no longer felt the same about anything. I remember going out with my mom about 3 months after the surgery and spotting a woman with twin girls, 2 years old and absolutely darling. I had never felt such envy and rage. I wanted to run up to her and shake her and tell her she was living the life I was meant to have. Then one night, Maureen had a vision from an angel. Even though I was asleep, she said, I was also awake. It's very difficult to describe my state of consciousness. I saw this beautiful angel sitting at the foot of my bed. She asked me, Why are you so sad? I told her that I had made a mistake in taking on this lifetime. This was not what I wanted, and the pain was too great. She replied, There is no reason for you to feel such despair. I've come to tell you that tomorrow you will meet your son. I looked at her and replied, That's impossible. But she said, Oh, is that so? You have not made a mistake in accepting this life, and your passion to be a mother was not given to you to cause such pain. Your agreement is meant to be fulfilled differently than you expected. That's all. Then the angel told her to go back to sleep. The next day felt like a dream fog to Maureen, who did not remember her dream when she first awoke. She wasn't sure what had happened, except that she sensed something was different. The phone rang about 10 in the morning. She said, A friend of mine named Lynn, whom I hadn't spoken with in a long time, called to tell me that she was now running an adoption center. I couldn't bring myself to tell her what I had been through, but just listened as she explained she found her work both satisfying and heartbreaking. She said, We are now looking for a home for this sweet little baby boy whose mother doesn't want anything to do with him. Instantly, Maureen said, I'll take him. He's supposed to be with me. He's my son. Lynn paused and said, Okay, let's start the paperwork. That must be the reason I thought about calling you. Then the dream exploded into my mind, Maureen told me. It wasn't a dream. My angel had really come during the night to bring me the message that I was about to have a baby. I just had no idea I was pregnant. Without a doubt, we are surrounded by our angels, invisible beings of light who guide us through the mysteries of our lives. Maureen did have a contract to be a mother, and when the time was right, the delivery took place. Ancient cultures believed that angelic messages came from higher source, God or gods, who have a history of communicating such warnings and requests. Several of these cultures were shaped in part by their belief in a system of cosmic order imposed by a deity. In their universe, individuals were expected to serve the will of that god, or at least to be under his supervision. The Aryans who invaded India and established the Vedic religion, the forerunner of Hinduism, in the Indus Valley around the 2nd millennium BC, called their god of order Mitra. In Persia, which had been invaded by other groups of Aryans, this same deity was called Mithra. Centuries later, the ancient Romans called him Mithras. Common to all three conceptions of this god force was the belief that all humans had contracts with heaven and were obligated to abide by these contracts. In his book, Mithras, D. Jason Cooper writes that the contract offered by the Aryan Mitra was not between equals, but Mitra was just Lord. Both sides had certain obligations. Mitra oversaw the affairs of his worshippers. He established justice for them. In return, his worshippers had to be upright in their dealings with others. Mitra was thus lord of the contract. According to the Rig Veda, the oldest sacred text of India, Mitra, whose name derives from an Indo-European root that translates as both friend and contract, was a fair god who took care of his followers. As the Lord of Justice, however, Mitra determined punishment as well as reward, and so expected people to complete all of the tasks assigned to them in an honorable manner. Because Mitra oversaw the activities of all humanity, he was also called the God of 10,000 eyes, able to observe and hear from his place in the heavens every conceivable action, from conversations held in small corners to participation in mass social rituals. Mitra was everywhere, a constant reminder to his devotees of the need to be and do what the gods expected of them. For all that, Mitra was not a threatening god, but one whose power lay in creating order and balance. Although he punished wrongdoers, he also had the capacity to forgive repentant humans, perhaps along with Yahweh, the first god who rewarded penitence. Within the Persian culture, Mithra also oversaw the contracts of humankind. In a yasht or hymn dedicated to Mithra in the Zoroastrian scriptures known as the Avesta, he is frequently referred to as the one who calls people to account. Like Mithra was considered a moral god, judging contracts not only between individuals, but between nations as well. Mithra punished those who broke their agreements, did not fulfill their obligations, and lived immorally. His punishments could include anything from the curse of a disease to death from a weapon. Mithra supported a well-organized, fair government and acted destructively toward people in power who harmed their own people. Mithra was also thought to be the judge of those whom commoners could not judge, their kings and other lofty rulers. No human being was above his wrath. It was Mithra who established truth as supreme among his worshippers. The ancient Indians, Persians, Greeks, and Romans were not the only people who believed that the gods watched over humans, kept accounts, and controlled human destiny. One of the principal deities of Norse mythology, for instance, is Var, the goddess of contracts and marriage agreements. Var is said to listen to marriage vows and compacts made between men and women, and to take revenge against any who break their vows. In the Mesoamerican region around the turn of the second millennium, the Toltecs and Aztecs worship a god, I can never say this word, named Tezcatlipoca, associated with destruction, like the highly regarded Indian deities Shiva and Kali. Tezcatlipoca ruled the night sky, moon, and stars. He presided over the cosmic ball court, which the Aztecs saw as the constellation of Gemini, where the gods played a game to set the fate of humankind. Tezcatlipoca was also the protector deity of slaves and punished anyone who harmed them. His name means smoky mirror. As a master of black magic, he was often depicted with a black stripe across his face or a black mirror made of obsidian and hematite on his chest. in which were reflected all the thoughts and actions of humanity. From the historical records of Mithra, we cannot tell how people were supposed to recognize their life contracts or how they might have been revealed to them. Perhaps those contracts obligated people to certain class, or perhaps a contract was thought of as a way of participating in a lifelong mystery that unfolded one step at a time. Nor is there any clear indication that people believed that their contracts had been agreed to prior to birth, or that they had any role or freedom in choosing their life's work. To find the earliest known account that addresses those subjects, we have to look at Greece in the 4th century BC. In Book 10 of the Republic, Plato gives a rich, detailed description of the stages of the entry, thought, which a soul must go through before incarnating on earth. Some scholars believe that Plato was simply using what is known as the myth of air, which closes the Republic, as a poetic metaphor to back up his argument for living a virtuous life. Yet the myth actually bears a striking resemblance to reports of contemporary people who have had near-death experiences, or who have recalled disembodied spiritual experiences that they believe happened before their birth. The heir of Plato The heir of Plato's tale was a Greek soldier who returned to consciousness some 12 days after he appeared to have died on the battlefield, awakening on his own funeral pyre. In the scene reminiscent of an Edgar Allan Poe short story, Eyre tells a remarkable tale of what he witnessed during the time he was suspended between life and death. As Plato relates the story through the voice of Socrates, Eyre found himself in a kind of way station between heaven and earth, where souls were passing from one plane to the other. The dead were waiting to be judged and assigned to their reward or punishment, while other souls prepared for journey to earth. In one great meadow, souls awaiting their return to earth went before the three fates: Clotho, who spins the thread of life; Lachesis, who determines its length; and Atropos, who cuts it off. Plato then writes, when Eyre and the spirits arrived, their duty was to go at once to Lachesis, but first of all there came a prophet who arranged them in order. Then he took from the knee of Lachesis lots and samples of lives, and having mounted a high pulpit, spoke as follows: Hear the word of Lachesis, the daughter of necessity. Mortal souls, behold a new cycle of life and mortality. Your genius will not be allotted to you, but you will choose your genius. And let him who draws the first lot have the first choice, and the life which he chooses shall be his destiny. After this prophet makes his announcement, he lays out many possible life scenarios among the souls waiting to incarnate, and advises them to choose from these samples of lives. Plato informs us that there are many more lives than the souls present, and they were of all sorts. There are lives of every animal and of man in every condition, including tyrants. And there were lives of famous men, some who were famous for their form and beauty, as well as for their strength and success in games, or again for their birth and their qualities of their ancestors. And some who were the reverse of famous for their opposite qualities. And of women, likewise, there were not, however, any definite character in them, because the soul, when choosing a new life, must of necessity become different. But there was every other quality, and they all mingled with one another, and also with elements of wealth and poverty, and disease and health, and there were mean states also. Plato makes it clear that while some of those choosing their lot in life were newly minted souls from heaven, Many others had lived before, and their choices were influenced by previous lives. Odysseus, for example, was disenchanted about ambition from his endless striving that he opted for the life of a private man who had no cares. Jungian philosophist psychologist James Hillman offers a cognate summary of the final stage of Plato's story in his book The Soul's Code, In Search of Character and Calling. When all souls have chosen their lives according to their lots, Hillman writes, they went before lachesis. Lachos equals one special lot or portion of fate. And she sent with each, as the guardian of his life and the fulfiller of his choice, the genius, daimon, that had been chosen. Lachesis leads the souls to the second of the three personifications of destiny. Clotho, to twist by spinning. Under her hand and her turning of the spindle, the destiny of the chosen lot is ratified. Then the genius, daimon, again led the soul to the spinning of atropos, atropos not to be turned inflexible, to make the web of its destiny irreversible. And then, without a backward glance, the soul passes beneath the throne of necessity, sometimes translated as the lap of necessity. Before entering life on the earth plane, however, the souls marched to the plane of forgetfulness, a barren waste with no trees or vegetation, and then were required to drink from the river of unmindfulness. As they drank, they forgot everything that had just transpired. The reason the gods ask us to do this should be obvious if you know ahead of time exactly what's going to happen in your life. Actually living it will seem as exciting as watching the replay of last year's St. Patrick's Day parade. How would you ever bring yourself to begin a relationship with someone who you knew would lie to you and abuse you, yet from whom you needed to learn a valuable lesson? How would you be able to bear counting the days when your loved ones would die? The problem of living with even some foreknowledge of one's future dilemma was brought home for me in a private consultation I gave to a man named Paul, who was in a serious state of depression. As I read Paul's energy file, the information encoded in his energy centers or chakras, I was struck by the lack of conventional sense of personal history that is typically present in the people whom I read. Instead, the information I was picking up was quite vague, leading me to speak only in, for me, frustrating appraisals such as, you sort of feel as if you can't make any choices in life and stick by them. Or it seems you almost get something started and then you just drop it. Paul had none of the substance that I can detect in people who have accumulated life experiences and cell memory. He was, in a sense, physically empty. So providing him with any kind of direct and clear information was impossible. The only semi-concrete image that I got was of Paul in discussion with people, but I could not relate these interactions to his depression. After I confessed my frustration to Paul, he opened up and said that actually one image was very useful to him because I had validated certain memories that had long troubled him. Paul could recall a number of incidents that had happened to him before he had descended into physical life. When I pressed him to be more specific, he astonished me by saying that the people with whom I had seen him in conversation were actually two beings of light, whom he vividly remembered had helped him create the elements of his lifetime. Before he was born, as in Plato's story of air, Paul had been presented with an array of choices and was urged to shape his life's mission based on events and influences from previous lives, obligations, and he needed to fulfill to be able to help others in their spiritual development, personal debts he owed, and some new experiences that he allowed to select. All of the events and relationships that he chose, with the help of his spiritual advisors, were woven together around one major path. The beings had been very specific about certain events he was meant to be a part of, adding that the details of getting to these events would be taken care of from their end. Paul felt he had been introduced to a kind of support group, a celestial version of AA, or Archetypes Anonymous, that sounded a lot like the archetypical patterns I had just begun to identify in my workshops and readings. Although Paul said that numerous details had been organized and explained to him, he could not recall most of them. He did remember that he had been given choices about some of the events that he would need to attend, and that he was told that he was under contract to learn tolerance, among other skills of the soul. Paul was also asked in what way he would like his learning to take place, and was offered 3 options. After choosing one, he was aware that in spite of the premeditated plans, there were still blank creation spaces that would be filled in by choices he made during his lifetime. It all sounded a little like choosing your college curriculum. Decide on a major, take the required courses, and then pick a few electives for fun. Sadly, though, Paul did not seem to be having much fun. The only thing he was sure of was that before descending from the energy plane of life to the physical plane, he had been told to take a drink from a river similar to Plato's river of unmindfulness. But because Paul did not want to forget everything that had just taken place, he decided not to drink the waters. In his words, he jumped the river and slipped into a ribbon of light that led directly into his mother's womb. As it turned out, his decision to flout the directions he was given had dreadful consequences. Because of his resulting larger-than-life memory, he had never felt grounded on earth, and consequently, he could not function in the real world, where he had trouble choosing to do anything, for fear that some part of him knew ahead of time that it wouldn't work out. I abdicated any power of choice I had by refusing to forget. Paul said, I'm drowning alive in the feeling that I have no power in any matters of my life. I should have agreed to forget, because that would have given me options in life. Paul said he was destined to live the first life that he saw, and that even though we have places to go and promises to keep, we still have to choose how our challenges or opportunities will manifest. It may be, for instance, that you need to go through a certain experience, say being passed over from a promotion, so that you'll discover what you really need to do. But if you knew before taking a job that you were going to end up in the dead end, you might have a lot of trouble showing up in the first place. As a result, you wouldn't get to have the kind of inner revelation that came only from finding your back up against the wall. Paul felt frozen into inaction by the constant sensation that he knew what would happen in any given situation. Although Paul's story was unusual, I suggest that he tried to have faith and that he actually still had his power of choice, but was just so stymied by his extraordinary memories that he was unable to recognize it, since the gift of choice cannot be taken from anyone. Whether or not Paul had actual memories, he may have been using them in an excuse for not living his life to the fullest, as a metaphorical inability to act decisively, which would be enough to depress anyone. Nonetheless, the parallels with Plato's story are intriguing. Whether we take Plato and Paul's fascinating stories from the level of reportage, myth, or metaphor, we can derive some valuable lessons from them. Plato makes clear that the choice of our lot in life is a cooperative effort with the divine. Though a series of aids or messengers, including the prophet, the three fates, and our personal daimon, a kind of guardian spirit, the divine offers us a selection of possible lives. Each life will vary in nature and length, but it is up to us to choose the individual setting with its attendant challenges. Our social and economic station in life, our physical appearance, health, and genetic predisposition are all part of the package. We even have the option, it appears, of choosing mean states, including a life of selfishness and megalomania. But the key to the myth, as well as the metaphor, is that these potential lives are eventually templates with no definite character. We each supply the specific character as we interact with the lives and challenges we have contracted for. In the Platonic scheme, then, free choice is an ongoing process that begins from the point at which we select the terms of our life, and it continues through our last action on earth. We are truly in control of our fate. Virtue is free, writes Plato, and a man honors or dishonors, and as a man honors or dishonors her, he will have more or less of her. The responsibility is with the chooser. God is justified. The very freedom can seem daunting, as if we are to freedom condemned, as John Paul Sartre put in the title of in one of his books. Even if we accept the principle of divine grace and guidance, we are still likely to long for some specific roadmaps. Some guide to our own contract. I believe that we can find that roadmap in part by examining the lives of some of the world's great spiritual masters, who, however high their level of realization, walked the same earth as we do and faced many of the same doubts and fears. Ugh.